This is Choose the Bear, where we dive deep into the power and joy of living a vibrant, independent life on your own terms. This podcast is your go-to source for smart, fun, and insightful conversations about what it means to embrace independence and live the life you choose. I'm Kat Calvin, and together we'll explore how this movement is challenging outdated stereotypes, redefining success, and empowering people to live their best independent lives. Hello, everyone. Today we have someone who is pretty famous, infamous, notorious, celebrated. I don't know what you want to say. I'm in the single world. Her name is Nicola Slawson, and you may know her Substack, The Single Supplement. It is truly excellent. It is probably the most well-read thing out there about being single. I don't know. She's been writing it for a while, and it is just so, it's entertaining, it's educational, it's enlightening, it's all sorts of things. And she finally has written a book called Single, that comes out, if you are listening to this on the day that the podcast comes out, February 5th, it comes out this week. And so it's really, really exciting. I was so thrilled to be able to talk to her. She answered my just random email to her Substack email, which was very nice. And I read the book, and I figured, because I read the newsletter, that it would be good, but it actually is really, really excellent. And I was really excited about the perspective, about the way that she weaves in her own story with other people's stories, and that she really worked hard to get such a wide variety of perspectives into her book, and it's really very, very good. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I fangirled a little bit, and also there are maybe a couple of moments where we talk over each other because there was a delay because she is in England, and I am very much not. And so, but it's a great conversation. I really loved it. The link to the book is in the show notes, or just Google Nicola Slawson Single. I really recommend buying it, and, buy it for all your single friends. If you're not single, buy it for folks who are. And if you're not single, read it, because you need to have some more respect for your single people in your life. That's just a note from me. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it. I really liked it. I'm very excited because I will be going to Nicola's book launch in England next week. So if you follow me on Instagram at @CatCalvinLA, then you will see hopefully a picture of us, which will be thrilling, I'm sure. But really, it's pretty great. It's exciting that there are so many awesome books coming out about being single or child-free or both, and so many people, mostly women, who are just really celebrating that status, which of course is what this book, this is a podcast, what this podcast is all about. So I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Well, I am so excited. If you have been a single person in the last many years, you have read this woman's work, because the Single Supplement is like the newsletter for single people. Whether we love being single, whether we hate being single, anything in between, we've all read the Single Supplement. And now the brilliant, wonderful Nicola Slawson has written a book. Yay! It's called, you'll be shocked, Single. Living a complete life on your own terms. And it's so good. We're going to dive into it. But I now am doing this podcast. I'm reading every book ever written about being single. And this one it's personal, but also has so many interviews from so many people. I have a list, I want to be friends with everyone in this book. It has so many different perspectives. And I think one thing that's really great about this book is that it both takes your life like into sort of it leads into every part of the book, but you also manage to make it relevant to so many different kinds of people. And it's actually really funny because there's even a part here where you interview like here, page 52, Tola, the single Black female, and like what she talks about. I'm like, that's exactly my life. And it's like you manage to hit so many different things. Which I'm just like obsessed with. I have literally like more than a page of notes and questions. And so welcome. I'm done gushing. I just really love this book.
Oh, well, that honestly, what you've just said is exactly what I hope people would think or feel when you know, when I was writing the book and when I planned it in advance. Because I think there's such a power in people's stories, and so there was a bit of pressure on me. Should you do more of a self-help book? Should it be more like academic, evidence-based? And I was like, I just really want to tell people's stories, my own and other people's. And I think that that's what makes people feel less alone. Also, what illustrates all the points I'm trying to make, because people have made them by what they're saying. So it's more of like the show, don't tell. Like, I don't need to tell you the stats I do, obviously, it does include like research and everything, but more important to me was the interviews and the stories, and also my story. So yeah, that's literally music to my ears. So I'm so glad, and really hope that other people feel the same way and that they can relate to parts of it or all of it or some of it. Because yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping.
Okay, well,
So
I really think they will. Before we dive into my 10 million questions, tell everyone all about you.
okay, so yeah, my name's Nicola Slawson. I'm a freelance journalist and writer based in the UK. Um, I've been a journalist for more than 10 years now. I was a career changer, so I started fairly late. Um, and when I was fairly far into journalism, I decided to launch a newsletter called The Single Supplement on Substack. And there was a few reasons why. I was going freelance, and when you're freelance, you're obviously pitching and hoping an editor will approve of your idea and give you permission to write it. And I kind of wanted an outlet where I didn't need that. I just was able to write what I wanted to write. Um, and for ages, I'd had thoughts and feelings about being single, about being long term single, about being the only single one in my friendship group. And I was too scared to say anything about it because I didn't want to rock the boat or annoy anyone. And I was asked to write a piece for the HuffPost. They had in the UK they had a series called Group Chat, which was all about friendships. And they'd heard me in the newsroom, because at the time I was working for HuffPost, on the news desk, so doing nothing to do with what I was doing, what I'm writing now. And they heard me moaning, about being the only single one in my friendship group, so they asked me to write a piece. And I said no for so long, and then eventually they wore me down, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And it was a really honest piece. And I couldn't believe the reaction. I just had the most amazing reaction. I had people telling me their life stories, people who I didn't have any idea had been either long-term single or previously had been long-term single and struggled with it, telling me things. It basically went a bit viral, and I was just inundated. And I just thought, there's all these stories, all these people, and they feel like there's nowhere for them to tell their stories, or there's no place for them to gather. And so I decided to launch the newsletter, and also because I was really annoyed by everything I was seeing out there for single people, which just for me felt like everyone who's single is desperate and miserable, or all they want to talk about is dating. And for me, it was like, there's so much more going on. Why, it's so limited. And so I created what I would wanted to read myself, basically. And it sort of took off. So, at first I didn't start with any subscribers, and it kind of took off. And off the back of the newsletter, I then got the book deal. So, I remember one person being like, I launched the book, the newsletter. I said, "Oh, are you doing this to get a book deal?" I was like, "Oh, I actually hadn't thought of that. Obviously, I'd always wanted to write a book, I didn't know that the thing I was going to write a book about was being single, because for years I was too ashamed to talk about being single. And I said in the book, writing a book about being single is like putting a tattoo on your forehead. So it's so funny to me that maybe 6, 7 years ago, I would have been like, you couldn't pay me to write about being single. But now I'm like, it's basically my brand. So yeah, that's the way. The newsletter also opened doors for me in terms of breaking free from news writing.
Yeah.
So I also then got to write more features, more opinion pieces, not just about being single, but about loads of things. And it helped me flex my writing muscles as well, because before that I was sort of just doing news reporting, which is very, focused, and it's very, sort of limited, whereas you could be more creative with other kinds of writing, which is always what I wanted to do, but I sort of got stuck doing news writing. So yeah, it was amazing. It wasn't just amazing to talk about being single, but also to help me in my career and my creativity, moving more towards being a writer rather than a journalist. So yeah, it took me ages as a writer, so long.
I think it takes a lot of people a long time to claim that. I love the this is going away from being single, but the freedom that sort of features and profile writers have. Like, everyone wants to write Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, which is the greatest piece of profile writing in the history of the world. And I could definitely see how writing the newsletter that you write would take you from sort of breaking news to like more towards on the scale of breaking news to Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. You're much closer to Frank Sinatra. Listeners, you have not read that, not immediately, finish this, pre-order Single, and then Google Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. It is literally the greatest piece of writing.
I agree. So inspiring.
So we're going to start with travel for two reasons. One, the only thing that I dislike about being single is single supplements. When you travel, so for people who either have not looked into this or are not single, single people get really screwed on cruises or travel tours, any sorts of things, because you have to pay what's called a single supplement, which is usually half to the entire cost of a second person on the trip. And it's really frustrating when you are single in a world, and this is why I am really obsessive about the research on single people, because we're trying to prove to the world there are a lot of us and we travel. And so maybe, before I decided it was unethical, I really wanted to go to Antarctica. It already costs $20,000. And then if you're single, they want you to pay another $20,000. It's literally, I love every single thing about being single except for that. And I think it's why I crack up every time I see your newsletter in my inbox, because it just infuriates me again. But you also talk in your book, you have done one of my big bucket list things, which is traveling around Morocco. And I love it. I love meeting another brave single woman. When I turned 18, literally the first thing I did was started buying tickets for my first solo trip, which actually I spent 3 months in the UK. But I'm 18, I can finally do it. And this is a big thing for me. But you talk about it a few times and about your travel. And you even have this great little insert section in which you specifically talk about your trip to Morocco and how you did it and the fears people had. And I just loved it so much. And that was where I was like, oh yeah, we've got to be besties. Can you talk a little bit about both that trip and about traveling solo and what it's meant to you?
Yeah, so my first experience of traveling solo was when I was in my early 20s, and I was meant to go around South America with a friend. We planned this whole trip. We were going to start in Costa Rica and then travel down to South America. And then separately, she was going to go and do some kind of healthcare internship or something. And I was going to go and do an internship on a radio station in Chile.
Oh, cool.
And so, because obviously I was, interested in the media and journalism. And I wanted to learn Spanish, and so it was like we were going to go to Costa Rica and do Spanish lessons, and then we were going to move down to South Korea. Anyway, South America. I ended up in South Korea at some point, so that's why I just said that. But we had this whole thing planned. We went twice, took the train to our nearest city to go to this travel agent that was designed for young people to like make a plan. We started buying stuff, like the whole thing, the entire itinerary, everything was done. And we were just waiting to choose when to go, like the timing wise, hearing back from the different internships and stuff. And then I was on Facebook, which was at the time, really popular. And everyone was saying congratulations to my friend for getting a place on a course. I think it was a degree course. And I was like, what is happening? So, people talking about her starting in September. And basically she bailed on me. She was like,
no.
oh, I changed my mind. She just didn't tell me.
Oh my God.
And I was too scared to do that trip on my own. There would have been the solo element to it, but it would have been after, maybe 3 months of traveling with a friend, doing the Spanish courses, and then I would have been solo, and then we were going to meet back up. Mm-hmm. That felt like, doable, because it is scary. It is so scary to think, all the things could go wrong.
Yeah.
And especially, if you've never been there before. And so I bailed on that. I was too chickened out, and so I ended up in America, actually, in Whidbey Island.
I love Whidbey Island.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? That's where I ended up for 3 months, because my cousin heard what happened and was like, why don't you come and stay with me for 3 months? And I did my first solo trip while I was there, where I went to Canada by myself. Went to Vancouver and then Vancouver Island. And the first night in Vancouver, everything went wrong. My card got blocked, so I couldn't pay I think I paid for the hostel, and then my card got blocked. And then I couldn't pay for dinner. I remember just crying to my friend, like being on I must have been on Skype or something, being like, why did I decide to come on my own? I'm just going to have to go to bed. And, she was just like, you've made it that far. You need to go and enjoy yourself. So I just went down into the street, and there happened to be a music festival going on at the time, a street music festival. Just got chatting to these people, and they happened to be staying at the same hostel as me, and just spent the whole weekend there with this German couple. And then we bumped into this other German guy. Actually, he approached me because he saw that I had a Lonely Planet guide, and I was reading it on my own. He was like, oh, I haven't met anyone yet. And he happened to be staying at the same hostel as well. It was amazing. So I just had this amazing time with these people. And so that was the first bit of solo travel. Mm-hmm. So I knew I liked it. And I started to do a little bit more. But my dream was to go to Morocco. And I thought, that's the type of thing you do, the romantic, partner. I'd seen lots of my friends do it with their husbands, boyfriends, get engaged in Morocco. It's quite, it's such a beautiful place. And I just kept putting it off, going. And then I decided, right, I had a month to fill because of the way my work contract worked. And I looked up how cheap it was to fly to Morocco. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just went for it. And everyone was saying, yeah, don't go. That's the worst place you can go as a solo woman. Just telling me I was crazy, basically. And it just made me more determined than ever to go.
Yeah.
And then I had the most amazing trip. And it makes me still, fills me with pride that I did it. And that I found the most amazing people. I did so many different things, and I did a big piece of journalism, which I did for the Observer in the UK, which I just thought, I'll try and do a little bit of work. But when I was there, I ended up finding this story and doing this thing. But that wasn't really on my agenda. My agenda was just go to Morocco. It was just the best feeling to not know how you're going to get somewhere. I was sort of doing this help exchange thing where you kind of volunteer to help out and you get free food and board. And quite a rural part of Morocco. I'd done it lots in Spain when I was living there, and I had to get from Essaouira to this quite rural place on the coast, which involved a bus journey, a taxi, and then getting picked up by, because it was quite a difficult place to get to. I was just thinking, how I couldn't even find the bus station at first. I was thinking, oh my god, how am I going to do this? And then when you accomplish something on your own and you've done it and you actually get there, you're like, oh my god, I did that. I did that myself. And you know, learning who to ask for help and trusting that, you know, there are good people in this world. Obviously, there are lots of dodgy people and scary people, but there are also so many amazing people. And yeah, I was just so proud of myself. And just seeing parts of Morocco, I had no idea I was going to see until I got there and just met people and kind of went with the flow a little bit. So yeah, I just think that it's one of the solo travel is like one of those things that just is so empowering and makes you feel really brave. And I wish everyone could experience it, but I know that a lot of people it's just too much, too scary for them. So that's why in the book I sort of talk about starting small, you know, maybe going somewhere local and just going for the day, and then maybe braving going overnight. Just because even doing, you know, that, even going away just for a night somewhere, finding the hotel, you know, get, you know, all those little things you have to do, finding somewhere to eat, it all going okay, or it all going tits up, and you still manage to, you know, figure stuff out.
Yeah.
It does boost your confidence.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes you feel like you can do anything.
It really does. On that first trip when I was 18, you know, and I was in London, and there was several situations that I like had to get myself out of and figure out. And you do afterwards, you know, if you're with someone else, you either you work it out together or whatever, but you always wonder like, how would I have to handle that alone? But when you travel alone, like you leave knowing I can handle anything. I am so brave and I'm so resourceful and I'm so smart, and it just changes you. And you actually reminded me, there's a book called Micro Adventures by this
Yes.
English adventure guy. Is his name Humphrey something?
Alistair Humphreys, I think.
Yes, Alex. I'll put it in the show notes, you guys. But I love that book because it does exactly what you say, where and you know, he does it sort of around England, but you can do it anywhere. It's like, what are like little things that you can
What you do in the evening, or a little adventure you could do after work.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. After work, or can you just go camp in the national park that's near you, right? Or go on a little lake tour or whatever. Like there are little things you can do to get started.
Yeah.
I have to start with Morocco.
Yeah.
If you do, more power to you. But yeah, you can start with little things and go from there. And I really I love that book. And also, if you love adventures, but you just don't have time to go on a big adventure, you can still do something fun over the weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I love that. So now that whole section, and I feel like that for me, you have another part. I mean, I love that you talk about all of the places that you've gone and the things you've done. Your whole Seoul story is awesome. It's funny. I was just in Seoul a couple years ago when I was reading that section. I was like, oh, and you were outside of Seoul, and I was like reading about the heartbreak and everything, and I was like, oh, and you were in South Korea, and it's so far away, and it's like so
it was really far away.
Trying to like people who speak your language and get you and blah blah. I was just feeling for you. But it also you have the part in Spain where the guy was like, "You're an adventurer," and I was like, "Sure, I just wrote about her Morocco trip." Like,
I love that. I love that, and he just looked at me and went, "Oh, you're an adventurer." It's like, yes, you got me. Yes. I love that.
You totally are. But the other thing that you do, this was another thing I identified with a lot, is you talk about when you were in school, you were changing careers, and you were wildly, madly broke. And as a person who discovered at a time right after law school that the best, for anyone listening who's broke, the best healthy, extremely cheap meal that you can have is kale, quinoa, and black beans. It will provide you with everything. And it'll cost you like $1.50. And I discovered that because I was so poor. So I felt that. But, you talk about it. One of the things that I'm trying to talk about and sort of find more people to come on the podcast to talk about is finances when you're single. You know,
Yeah,
like it is a thing that in some ways it's really empowering because you never have to ask anybody how much to spend on anything, but also you have to pay for everything on
yeah,
your own. And there are those times when, when I started my nonprofit or was super broke or bought my house, and it's just like, there are moments when it's like, oh, if I had another person here, then I wouldn't have as much of a financial risk
yeah.
as I do now. And I love that you were very raw and honest in talking about how hard it was for you, which I appreciated because I think most people are not willing to admit, like, yeah, I had to borrow money from my parents and blah blah blah. And it
Embarrassing.
so powerful for you to admit that because I think a lot of people will look at you and they see this successful author and you have a book and you have, this like wildly popular newsletter. And I know that people probably, because people say this to me and to other people, feel like, oh, this person doesn't actually know what it's like to be broke. Even though
Yeah,
anyone can look at a journalist and think you don't know what it's like to be broke.
I know.
You were really raw and honest about it. And I love that you went into, the particular challenges for single parents. I was raised by a single mother. I know how hard that is financially. And you were really honest about it, which I appreciated. So you talk a little bit about like what it was like for you writing that, because I know it has to have been hard to be that vulnerable on the page. Everyone in the world is about to know that I had to like bum off my parents. Also, what the lessons were that you learned from that about being single and having
Yeah.
an income.
Oh, yeah. I think writing about it, like, I sort of have this thing where sometimes I'll just write something and I think like, oh, it's really important, and then afterwards I'm like, oh, yeah, people are going to be reading this. So it wasn't it wasn't like I was thinking about that when I was writing it. I was just like, this is really important, and I do feel really passionately about um, how much more difficult it is when you are single, because I think that people just take it for granted. Little things, they take for granted, like, oh, I've run out of money this paycheck, you know, but oh, and their partner will be like, oh, it's all right, I'll get this,
Yeah.
for a meal. Just little things, but also disposable income. You have so much more disposable income if you're living with someone and you're sharing all of the bills. And it wasn't actually until a few years ago, it was like a financial company or something did some research about how much extra you pay on average. Obviously, it was all averages when you're single. But I was like, oh, that's why my friends who are in relationships who earn less than me can go on like these swanky holidays. And for the last few years, I haven't been on holiday because I've been renting a whole house by myself. Um, so yeah, I think that because I'd been through that experience quite a while ago, sometimes with writing, it helps to write immediately. And sometimes with writing, there's this phrase called write from the scar, not the wound.
Mm-hmm.
So even though obviously it is very vulnerable and, embarrassing, and like I was writing a long time after it happened. And I think that it was like important for me to include because I was struggling for different reasons. Like I want to buy a house and I'm finding it really difficult. So I'm not in that extremely skint phase where I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to just get some tea, get some hot water for my tea bag. I'm out the house because I can't literally afford a cup of tea or coffee. Um, I'm not in that phase anymore, but I'm still feeling the burden of having to pay for everything myself and having to worry about taking risks because I don't have someone at home who can help shoulder that risk. And so, yeah, it wasn't that difficult to write. But then afterwards, I did think, oh yeah, I'm going to be reading this. And yeah, one of my friends read the book fairly early on, and she was just like, I had no idea about any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just like, oh, it's just amazing. You went through that, and I was like, oh yeah, people reading it and thinking, I wonder what they're going to think. Like, are they going to judge me? Um, are they going to? I don't know. You just think, there's so much shame around finances. But yeah, it was recently with this study that was done that kind of released some of that shame for me. So I was like, oh, it's not just that I'm bad with money, because I'm not that great with money, but it's also because they have much more disposable income. They're sharing. If you have a one-bedroom flat, for example, it costs the same to heat whether there's one of you living there or two.
Exactly. Yeah.
So some people are like, oh no, it's cheaper to be single. How is it cheaper to be single? Even if you're buying less food, most things that you buy in a supermarket are come in packages that aren't designed for one person. So you end up buying, say, a bag of salad. You can't buy like just an individual portion. You have to buy the same bag that everyone else buys, and you've got to try and use it up. And you probably won't use it before it starts going slimy and gross. So, yeah, like water bill. All these kind of bills that you pay. Most of the time, you're paying very similar. You're using either similar or only just less than two people, just because the way things are. But you pay so much money.
It's so much. Well, and you interview Bella DePaulo, who seems awesome. But one of the things that you talk about in the book is that we also have very pronatalist governments in most countries in the world. And so we also, as single people, pay, extra in taxes. We don't get the benefits and deductions. Like everything about how the world is built is designed to incidentally penalize people who are single, and whether single or childless and not, because you really dive into how single parents really end up getting a lot of detrimental financial incursions as well. And so it's not even just the household stuff. Is that literally, the government is penalizing us?
Yeah, we're subsidizing. Hmm? We're subsidizing married couples to have tax breaks and benefits because they've decided to get married. And it's actually crazy when you think of it like that, because you're like, why should they get? Even as simple as my sister and I pretend that we live together so that we can get a joint membership to a heritage organisation where you pay a membership and you can go visit any of these places. Mm-hmm. And they're beautiful historical places, big parks, and they're in loads of places. So it's good to have a membership because anywhere you go, you can kind of go for a nice walk or whatever. And we pretend we live together because the only way to get joint membership is that you have to be living under the same address. Why wouldn't they want more people? Why can't friends be joint members? Like, why do you have to live under the same?
Because they don't think of it that way. And actually, do you know why couples get
Sorry, yeah, we're subsidizing people to have a cheaper membership.
Yeah.
Because if you live together and you're married, you get a cheaper membership. But those people have much bigger disposable income than single people, and yet we're the ones paying more. It's actually horrible when you think about it. It makes you so angry. Sometimes I have to just not think about the single supplement and the extra money because it makes me so mad, even though I called my newsletter the single supplement. Like, when I really think about it, it does make me really...
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
Well, but because and I'm sorry, I think I realized we have a bit of a delay, so I will try to pause before I ask questions. But the reason that married couples get tax deductions is because it was an effort to keep women home and not working. So there's actually like historical record about that. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, right, because being a woman is terrible regardless of whether you're married or single. But like the fact that, and because of course single women make less money, we get paid less, etc. Like we're being penalized because of a policy that was put in place to penalize women. It's a galaxy brain like mind. But the good thing is people like you and and there's so many people who are now coming out with being honest about this and bringing attention to it. And because the numbers of single people are growing so much, particularly if you look at millennials and Gen X or Gen Z, I think we're ripe for a policy change. but also there are people who are starting to like financial planners who are like, oh, maybe I should specialize in helping single people because even when you think about, generational planning or like end of life planning, if you look up everything, it's all about, your children and your grandchildren and like what if you don't have those? And so
My Some of my the members of the community have talked about that, and I included a bit of that in the book actually about what happens when you get old. And some of the people were like, everything is focused on, you know, your who's going to inherit, and it's usually your children, and also who's going to look after you when you get old, and who's going to make sure that you have dignity. And that's one of those things where it's like you shouldn't have children just so someone can look after you. That is sometimes what people worry about or think about. But there's a lot of child-free people who, they definitely don't want that, but at the same time, they are worried about that, and they're worried about who's going to make decisions for them if they're incapacitated. And yeah, there's nothing really set up for it. I mean, maybe it's starting now, but there's sort of even just articles, you Google stuff, it's all focused on if you're married with children. You're sort of starting to think about those things or plan those things. And these are the things that keep single people up at night. But, that goes back to why I started the single supplement, because those are the things that people worry about. And yet, if you read the stuff about being single at the time, it was just all just like, oh, I've got a bad dating story, or
yep.
and it's just so trivial when actually it impacts every part of your life. And when you really start thinking about it, you're like, oh my god, it does actually impact every part of my life, my relationship status, even your career. You think, oh, that's nothing to do with it, but when you're single, you're only reliant on yourself. So other people might be like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and start a new business, but they know they've got someone at home who can help them pay the bills and make sure that they're not going to be completely, down and out if it all goes wrong. Whereas when we're single, we don't have that safety net. So it's going to make less risky choices. So we might not, achieve as much as people in relationships because we don't have that backing or safety net. Or we might not be as creative because we think, oh, we just need to earn money. So we need to earn money to pay our bills because there's only us. And we might not, try new things or spend our time doing something off our own back. Like this podcast, for example, like it's great you're doing it. But a lot of people will be like, oh, I just don't have time because I've just got work, So I just think that's so sad as well, because what creative, amazing things or businesses or whatever might have been created if there'd been more support or more understanding in society for single people, because there are a lot of us, and you're right, it's growing. So yeah, it just blows your mind when you start to think about how much it impacts everything. You're like, ah. But at the same time, I don't like to be too negative, because there's also like I also see some people let it hold them back, and they let that sort of bitterness about what they're not getting, and they only see what they're lacking.
Yeah.
They miss out on what they do have, because what you do have is freedom. And when I did a thing on Twitter, it's X now, but when it was Twitter, where I asked people what they missed about being single, and I was literally, got so many comments and messages. A lot of them were private messages because people didn't want to admit that they missed stuff about being single. But most of them, the large majority, was like to do with freedom, and it was to do with things like doing solo travel if they wanted to, or spending the night, completely in their pajamas watching a film and not having to like think about someone else or factor someone else into their plans. Just all the things that maybe as single people we do take for granted a little bit, especially if we don't want to be single, because we might just be focusing on what we're lacking. But actually, we should be making the most of these things while we've got them. So yeah, it's hard and there are challenges, but it's also can be amazing.
Well, I mean, and I think one of the things that is really powerful and that people who are not single or do have children need to adopt is that we're thinking about these things. And I think a lot of people, who have kids think, oh, well, they'll be there to take care of me. And I think I've said this on the podcast before, but my grandmother is 94 and she was just recently in the hospital for 2 months. She's doing great. But for that 2 months, she has four daughters and multiple granddaughters, et cetera. And we basically just did shifts. And like every moment that she was awake, there was someone there with her. We were always there. And that was great. But every time I walked down the hallway she was in the recovery ward of a nursing home. So all of the people in the home were in their 70s, 80s, 90s. And every time I walked through the hall, every other room was empty. And all of the staff would always comment on like, wow, you guys are always here. Nobody else has people who are always here. And there were rooms where it was rare to see anybody, or where you knew like, oh, that one daughter comes once a week or whatever. And you would hear people yelling like help down the hallway. And I was like, I would bet that if not every single person, 95% of the people in this ward have children, have grandchildren, maybe even great grandchildren, but they're not here. And you read over and over again, right? The fact that it's just not a guarantee that your kids are going to be there, and now my grandmother's best friend is in the hospital. And she, has two kids and one lives all the way across the country and can't be here the whole time. So now we're helping with her. But like, my grandmother was really the outlier. And we're thinking so much about what are we going to do in the future because we know we don't have anyone to be sure to count on, or that we have to build our chosen family or whatever. But I think that's actually powerful because we're not planning on like having these kids who may not be around for whatever reason to be there.
It's sorted because they're there.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
And one person said, they were talking about a relative whose children or something didn't agree with, the sort of care that she herself wanted. So sometimes you're stuck with like that kind of conflict where you want something to happen, but the people who are helping look after you think totally differently to you. So you could end up in a situation where your wishes aren't being, carried out anyway, even if you were married and you have children. And it's very rare that we, die at the same time as someone else. It's not like The Notebook where they, you pass away exactly the same moment. Most people die and then leave another one behind anyway. So you end up being essentially single, and it's usually the woman.
Yes,
and women live longer. So that's something to bear in mind as well. One thing about being single is we are better able to cope with being on our own. So even if we did end up in a relationship, if we were alone again when we're much older, we've got to draw on to go back on. Whereas people who've never really been single, it's going to be a horrible shock to the system if they end up on their own, which most people do at some point. So.
Yeah, and you talk about there were only two parts in the book that I was very angry. One was I'm really mad at you because you added so many books to my to be read list because you have this amazing section, stories that defy the narrative. And I was like, oh, I'm so angry with her because now I have a million new books that I should have my already too long to be read list. But I love, love, love that you put this in because I was lucky growing up because I was really into like fantasy and sci-fi, and there are usually stories about like strong, powerful little girls.
Yes.
So I didn't realize the dearth of those kinds of writing.
Maybe like that you did Alien then in there.
Oh,
like Alien?
I love Alien. I actually just did a whole Alien thon of all the aliens. But like I love that this section in it because particularly, I have a friend and her daughter is 11 and, I'm always sending her, people always sending her like books about strong girls but there's so many women who need it. And it's such a great selection. You have wool on here. I am I literally all I'm living for is the season finale on Friday of Silo, which is based on Wool.
I really,
You read the
okay.
book, it's so good. But yeah, really strong female character. You know, you have so many Daisy Jones, and I mean, just so many. So I was very upset with you because now I just have so much reading to do, and it's just wrong. But I was thrilled by that. But the other one was when you were talking about being very vulnerable with a friend after a wedding about like wanting what you had seen there, and your friend immediately, very clearly, and I'm glad that you wrote this in the book, but like very clearly just taking from her own experience of being unhappy and trying to be protective and sort of attacking you and saying you can't really, you're not really happy when you're single. And you went through a growth journey that I thought was really beautiful. But the thing that I thought as I was reading that was, for people who, unlike me, are not confirmed bachelorettes, but who are single, I think that having that time to find out who you are and to really be truly happy being single is the best possible way to ensure that you end up in a healthy relationship where you're also happy, right? And I think, and you talk about like your friend who had always been in relationships and married since she was 24 and how she talked about that. And that to me, it seems like it's such a bonus, particularly when we're living in a world where, 50% plus of marriages end up in divorce, like 75% end up miserable, right? And like, but like, obviously the more you know yourself and the happier you are, and you're going to end up in a better relationship. And people can be more than one thing. You could be a really happy person single and also be really happy in a relationship. And I was so happy. I don't think I've seen anyone else articulate that the way you did in this book, and I was so happy that you did, because we are seen as being, everything's so black and white. And I think the title of the chapter is even like living in the gray, right? Like, everyone sees it as black and white. You're either single and you have to be dating frantically to get
Yeah.
married, or you're just a miserable old spinster. And it's like,
Yeah.
just be happy being single. And then also, meet the love child of Keanu Reeves and John David Washington and be really happy being married. Like, those two things are possible. And I love that you put that in the book.
Oh, I'm so glad. Like, I think that something really annoys me when there's no nuance in the conversation. It is possible, and yeah, that conversation with the friend, um, just confirmed to me that yeah, people are so black and white in their thinking.
Yeah.
So this is this and this is that, and she was just like, "You're unhappy being single. You should just be more honest." And I was just like, "I've never said I want to be single forever." And I've always said, everyone knows I'm a big romantic. I love weddings. And it's like, that doesn't mean that doesn't negate every other experience I've had where I've really enjoyed myself and found joy being single just because I was emotional in that one moment.
Right.
Just take that away. Um, but then I sort of decided to start examining, am I kidding myself? And also, am I am I like Bella De Paulo says, there are these people who are single at heart, who are, never going to be in a relationship, and they're, you know, that's their best life when they're not in a relationship. Sometimes I think maybe that is me, because I think my best life, when I'm been really myself, really authentic, has been when I've been single. And I sort of decided to examine that, but I sort of realised as I was writing it that that isn't me. That I can see parts of what Bella's saying, you know, does relate to myself. But I do see myself being in a relationship in the future. Whereas people who are single at heart, they just don't see that at all, and they're really comfortable and happy with that. But I also wanted to explore that some people do want to find somebody and never do. They never find the right person for them. And that's almost like a taboo as well, to talk about that, because you're
Yes.
not supposed to talk about it. You're supposed to say, oh, it'll happen when you least expect it. Or, oh, they're just around the corner. You just got to keep hoping. And it's like, yeah, they might be, but some people don't. Some people die before they meet them. And that doesn't mean they didn't live a good life. It doesn't mean that they don't deserve, they deserve, there's sort of a lot of pity and shame around it. Oh,
Yes.
they didn't meet anyone before they died. No, they still lived an amazing life. They still probably were surrounded by friends or community. They were probably involved in loads of really cool things, volunteering or whatever. They might have done amazing stuff at work. You know, why everything is sort of all of our worth as people, as human beings, it's tied to our relationship status still, and it just drives me up the wall, you know.
Mhm. Well, and you said something in the book uh, that it reminded me of something that the disability rights community says all the time, which is every single person will live. Well, you'll either, if you live long enough, you will eventually become disabled, right? I am not articulating that as well as they do, but that's one of the thing, right? Like if you're lucky enough to live a long life, at some point you're going to develop some sort of disability, right? Like that's just my grandmother's 94. She's really healthy for a 94-year-old. She walks with a walker. She's 94 years old, right? Like you're all going to. And the point is maybe you should start fighting for disability rights. It's very difficult to get human beings to care about things that don't involve them. So like if you're not doing it for people who have disabilities right now, do it because you're either going to die young or you're going to end up having a disability, right?
Yeah.
And so you talk about sort of the same thing about how so much of the, oh, you're going to find someone, there's someone for everyone, isn't necessarily because people really believe that, but because people who are in couples recognize that there is a very good chance that they will end up single, right? And I mean, it's like you just said with older women, like you're either going to die before your partner and then they'll end up single, or they're going to die before you, or there's a 50 to 70% chance you're going to get divorced or something. And so like being in a relationship for very few people is a permanent state of being.
Yeah.
And if it's a permanent state of being for one person in that couple, it means the other one's going to end up single, right? And so this whole idea, like if people were able to embrace that instead of running away from that, then there wouldn't be as much shame about being single. Because first of all, you were single at some point because you got married after, I mean, I hope after 18, right?
So, yeah, exactly.
You've been single, you're going to be single again. This is not a permanent state of being. And yet it's treated with such shame and you know embarrassment and whatever. And it's kind of bizarre when you think about it that way.
So bizarre. Yeah. Well, thanks for you sort of like summed it up perfectly. It's a shame you weren't around when I was writing the book and being like, how do I explain what I'm trying to say? Oh,
For all authors listening, I am available for consulting. So one of the other things you said that I was, it made me angry, but also I had a real sort of thought about this because we have all every country in the world is panicking about their falling birth rates, and yet you talked about the NHS and I'm the fact that, and for folks who don't know, like the NHS is separated sort of into different regions, and so that a lot of the NHS didn't at the time you wrote the book, and I don't know if this has changed. Didn't cover IVF for single women.
yeah.
And then but there was a whole issue with the queer community, and so they started covering it for women who were married but not men, and there's this whole thing, and so that in itself was very very frustrating, but then I also was like, I wonder, and I imagine that that's probably the same in many countries.
Yeah.
But then I thought, I wonder if that's going to change because all of these countries are panicking about their falling birth rates.
I
So
wonder.
now maybe single women around the world have a really good opening to go and be like, hey, you're really freaking out. I want to get pregnant. How about you pay for it?
Yeah, because people are really freaking out about the rate, and I think there was a story the other day, wasn't there, about how bad it actually is. But so far, the cogs that are turning with policy are still very much focused on, oh, it's just women who are in relationships not doing it because they're focusing on their career, when actually, even taking aside the fact that single people have to pay for so much upfront themselves, the cost of raising a child when you don't have support with childcare and everything is so expensive that that's the main thing that's putting people off. But what it's still, the politicians are stuck on this idea that it's just because women want a career and that's the reason. It's like, no, That's nothing to do with it. We can't now. Most people can't live um, on one income where one person is basically a stay-at-home mum or whatever. You know, if you're raising a kid, actually, you need two incomes to not be on the poverty line in an average sense, because it depends on how much that person earns. But like, it's really, really difficult to raise a child on one income, and live a comfortable life. So most people these days, everyone has to work. You can't have someone just staying at home and doing all of those things while the man goes out to work. It's just not where we are in society. It's not where we are with the cost of living. It's just not where we are. But some of these politicians still seem to be stuck in this idea that that is how it's just, oh no, it's just because women are ambitious and want a career. No, it's the cost of things.
It's also like you could address climate change, you could address violence
So
against
many
women,
things.
you could address the
Yeah.
housing crisis. Like you could address
Housing crisis.
other things that are the
Yeah.
reasons that people are choosing not to have children. and
And then
see that
and then yeah, when you bring single people into it, it's like, well, yeah, these there's so many people who want to have a child, but they're blocked out because of this policy.
Mhm.
So yeah, I hope that it would change things. I can't see it happening, you know, in the next year or two, but we'll see.
No, I don't think it's certainly anytime soon, but I do think that more voices speaking out like yours and more research coming out showing how many people, particularly in the Western world, are like how many millennials and Gen Z are choosing to be single, are choosing to be child free, will force the government to realize, like, oh, this is about more than women learning to read. you know, like Russia now is like, oh, we'll just stop women from getting educations. It's like, well, that's not the problem, But hey, maybe if we address like the fact that the world is burning, then people will choose to have children. So I'm hoping that more of these stories and more of this research makes governments realize that they need to make serious policy changes and not just say like, oh, we'll give you an extra 500 pounds a year. That should do it, right, kids?
Exactly. Could be really good. Could be a really good opportunity. And actually, like I've been thinking about, you know, launching a campaign, and you know, it's so hard to sort of be a campaigner, as obviously you know, and like I want to do it, then I'm like, oh, it's just going to take over my life, and then so I'm trying to sort of build a bit of a collective of people who care about this issue, got different skills to maybe do something. So that's sort of what I'm currently doing in sort of background at the moment.
Well, if you want to talk to someone who's trying to do the same thing in the States, my friend Shannon Coulter just started working on a political movement and a little bit of a like political organization for single people in the States. We did a big Zoom call that a bunch of people joined, had a bunch of speakers, and it was fantastic. But she's trying to do a similar thing, and I think we're going to see more of that popping up around the world, which is exciting.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'd be really interested. Yeah, I hope more of that, definitely.
So I'm going to end, sadly, because this is fascinating. I'm a Susan B. Anthony quote that I was obsessed with. The woman who will not be ruled must live without marriage. And I love that quote. I am one of those single at heart confirmed bachelorette people. So for me, I was like, this is getting cross-stitched and put on my wall because it's so excellent. But what, I really felt too that it summed up so much of this book and so much of what we've been talking about, which really is, to me, I do love that you are very open about the fact that, like, I don't want to be single forever necessarily. I'd love to be in a relationship. But while I'm single, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to live my best life and I'm going to learn to love myself and to be an amazing person because I deserve that, A, and I deserve to live these single days being awesome, but also because that is going to make sure that I am in a marriage where I am not a woman being ruled, but where I am in a happy, equal relationship and where I have the confidence, if that is not the case, to leave and be single again.
Yeah.
And for me, like, it's that summed up what I think is really powerful about this book in particularly, and that I think is a perspective that I haven't seen often. which I really loved. And it was why I love this book. It's why I want to end it with it. I'm so glad that you wrote this. I think for people who are single at heart, people who want to be in relationships, for people who are devastated that they're single and are frantically dating, like for everybody, this book is really beautiful and really empowering. I'm just such a big fan of it. I'm really thrilled that it's coming out.
Oh, thank you so much. Like, I can't tell you how happy that makes me feel. Like, everything I could have wished for, like when I was writing it, you've made it all worth it. So thank you so
Yay.
much. I really hope that people read it. I hope that people pick it up who aren't necessarily loving being single. Because the people who are loving being single, you know, that's great, and I think they will love it. But I hope to sort of help shift a little bit, change people's minds a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important. In just every way as we look at how we can continue to empower women, particularly because being single and female has just so many different connotations, and how we can help women understand. And that's really what Choose the Bear is about. Is like you can find joy in being single or being child free, and then if later you're not, that's great. But like, why not be joyful now?
Why put your life on hold, or
Exactly.
feel like you're in a waiting room? I hate that feeling. I used to have it where I'd be like, oh, I can't do that because I'm, and what Morocco was one of them. I put that off because I thought that was something I should do with a romantic partner, for a romantic getaway. Um, so many things I sort of like, I'll do that when I settle down. I'll do that when I've, found a husband. And then you're just denying yourself joy. You're just letting yourself live a half life. Well, you're not. You're a whole person, and you deserve to live a full, happy, messy, amazing life. And yeah, sometimes it's going to be really hard, and sometimes it's going to be joyful. Just like if you're in a relationship, and you don't have to put your life on hold or be in a waiting room or live a half life just because you're single. And that's what society makes you feel, because we live in a coupled up world. But it's not true. And if you break away from that, then you can find joy where you can get it.
Well, I love it. Obviously, folks listening, today is February. Well, if you're listening to this the day it came out, the podcast comes out. English, I do speak it. The book comes out February 11th. Today should be the 5th. I'm projected to the future, but I have a calendar. The link is in the show notes, or just Google, Amazon, Indie Reads, whatever, Single by Nicola Slawson, Slawson. Please pre-order it for yourself, for everyone you know who's single. It is a great book. And also, one of the things I thought is this is a perfect book to come out right before Valentine's Day. I'm a big fan of, I buy myself presents constantly because I'm single. I can do that. But there are a lot of people for whom Valentine's Day is a tough day.
Yeah.
So this is a great book to buy for all of your single friends right before Valentine's Day, because it comes out 3 days before, and you can empower them on a day that is difficult for a lot of single people instead of not. And I am just so grateful that you joined this podcast, and thank you for writing the Single Supplement for so long. It's really been a wonderful, empowering newsletter.
Thank you so much, and thanks for sending that email and reaching out, because it's just been amazing to meet you, and I'm so honoured to be on your podcast. So thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and of course, leave a review. Until next week, here's hoping you find joy in your solo life.